what do you think the main difference is between the genres of horror and thriller?
Thrillers are basically just horror plus drama, really, without all the jump scares, right? And all the gore. So sort of tempering some of that kind of stuff is what makes it a thriller. But you have the same, when you're structuring a thriller, you're structuring it in the same way as you would structure horror, right? You have a climbing action where you're constantly ratcheting up tension for your protagonist and trying to develop twists that people aren't expecting and all of that. So that is all sort of the same, I think.
Yeah, the lines are kind of blurred. I mean, they're both stories of high suspense, escalating conflict. The stakes can often be life or death. In some ways, I feel like a lot of horror films have more of an overriding mystery, just like a what the hell is going on here or what's going to happen. Like something like Get Out, Rosemary's Baby or Stepford Wives. Like we know something's going on, but we're waiting and waiting and waiting for that big reveal. Whereas a thriller could just be escaping from a single location and there's bad guys coming after you, But yeah, really the lines are blurred. Maybe horror is more stuck into genres. Like it doesn't have to be stuck, but there's a lot of subgenres for horror. And usually a movie comes out and you kind of know what subgenre it is, whereas a thriller could kind of be anything. But the lines are blurred.
Okay. Anyone else want to jump in? Yeah.
I was just going to say also, I think one of the things about horror that sets it apart from thriller is that there's just sort of this focus on the debasement of human nature and depravity, levels of depravity, right? That shock us. And you don't really see that in a thriller so much. They both have protagonists that are everyday people, right? Because we want to be able to imagine ourselves in the situation because that's why they're scary. But I think thrillers have something where, this just feels like it could happen to you. Your husband has a whole nother life where he was a serial killer, blah, blah, versus just the levels of depravity that come from what you see in a horror movie is sort of like the hook in some way.
I also think it just has a lot to do with the marketing of the movie at the end of the day. Because I think you can take either of those movies, you could take Seven and say Seven's a horror movie. But it was marketed as a thriller. But you could easily say that's a horror film. That's horrific.
Jeffrey, when you created Final Destination, where did that idea come from? Did it come from something that happened, or like where did it start?
Flying home on a plane to Kentucky, and I read an article about a woman who was she was getting married or coming home from vacation the next day, and her mom said, "Don't take the flight you're on. I have a bad feeling about it." And the plane she was supposed to be on crashed, so she changed her flight. And I was on a plane reading this, and I was like, I've never been afraid of flying, but I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting, And as writers, you put an idea in your head and it percolates, and you don't exactly know how it's going to turn out. And then, over time, I was like, well, that'd be kind of cool if she cheated death. And then, what if death came back after her? And then I wrote it as a TV sample. This was back in the golden days of Hollywood when you would write TV spec scripts to get agents. So I wrote it as a spec X-Files script. Never submitted to the show, but I got an agent through that. And then, in that, I was fortunate to be working at New Line Cinema at the time. I worked there for 11 years, starting at 19. And so I knew that I didn't want to submit it the normal process. So I went to some producers, Craig Perry and Warren Zide, to develop it. And we just went through many iterations, but, it was always that. And honestly, the originality was the problem for them. They're like, well, how can you make a horror movie with death is the killer? Like, you can't see it and you can't fight it. That doesn't make any sense. And we're like, that's the whole point. Like, everybody's afraid of death. And so it was even a creative battle at that time to do that. So,
wow.
Yeah.
How long did it take from development? How long did that process take?
It was a pretty quick process till I developed my first draft of the script. And then James Wong and Glenn Morgan, who serendipitously worked on the X-Files at the time, and were two of my favorite people on there, they came on board the project, and the studio greenlit it pretty quickly when they came on board. So they wrote the actual shooting script, but they used enough of my material where I got sole story credit and shared screenplay credit. And they came up to their credit, because that's why I kind of try to keep my ego out of my work as much as I can. I won't compromise on certain things, but you know, they came up with the whole Rube Goldberg aspect, because in my original draft, Death, I'm very influenced by Nightmare on Elm Street, which is my favorite movie. Death used the survivor's guilt to the characters and their sins against them until they, you know, killed themselves. So that was a little darker. But the Rube Goldberg angle that James and Glenn came up with really opened up, I think, the franchise to people that don't normally go to see horror films.
Right.
So I think that, you know, I'm very glad that they came in and took it in that direction as far as how Death got to people.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have to say, it's one of those movies that if, you know, you're driving down the road and you see the log truck done, you look at that bus going by and you're like, nope. I mean, I think that that franchise just unlocked so many new fears in people. Yeah. It was just genius all around for my generation. Everyone talked about that. And I think that's one aspect that I love about horror too. It's just talking part of it. You know, it's, oh my God, the water cooler moments if you're old.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and the log truck, that was another thing where I'd written this story for the second one, but we weren't sure what the opening was going to be. And Craig Perry, who's a wonderful producer, you know, I was driving home to Kentucky again. I always blame Kentucky, or give Kentucky credit, I should say. But I got behind a log truck, and then I pulled into the next lane, as I always did. And then I was like, wait a minute. Then I pulled off the highway, and I called him. And I was like, what about a log truck, you know, on it? And he's like, what? Slow down. I was like, what about a log truck on a freeway and the chain brake? He goes, that's the opening, Jeffrey.
Oh my God.
Because we've been going back and forth so much on that. And that's where it's interesting, where I think is when you're being creative, you have to make sure you don't stay at home all the time behind your computer, because living life is, you know, and I'm on the clock. I'm at Starbucks most of the time. So, you know, do as I say, not as I do. But, you know, getting out there and living life, like that's a lot of times where some of your biggest inspirations will come from.
Right. Yeah, I'm from Oregon, so that it was like always the log trucks, and we're like, no, get around it, always. And Evan, to you also. So you produced the Cabin Fever, the first one and the second and third one. Is that correct?
I did them all.
You did all of them. Okay.
I'm sorry.
It was a relatively small budget going into that first one, and I mean, it's full of some really great deaths that I think were, you know, just again, same with Final Death, just memorable and talking, you know, people talking about the screwdriver in the ear and the, you know, the dog coming and shoot like her body parts are gross. But can you just talk about the budget of that and how you got, were there creative choices that you had to make based on that budget that weren't in the script, or how did that work in terms of making this for that much money?
No, you know, it's interesting because, like, to answer the last part of the question first, is that when we remade the film in like 2016, and Travis Z, the director, Travis Warney, and Eli, and I got on a call, and Travis had asked him, like, if you, you know, like from a budget perspective, was there anything that you had to cut out of the script? And Eli had like 4 or 5 pages that I'd forgotten that we'd asked him to kind of remove, and we put it back in the new one. But like, to come back to your original question, we made the original film for $900,000. We got the film in the can for about $900,000 cash, and we had gotten an editing room from a really big, well-known edit house, not like as an investment. So we basically like had an avid edit of the film and nothing left. We're all broke. Our credit cards have been maxed, and one of our executive producers, Susan Jackson, who's no longer with us, but she was really instrumental in the film getting financed and at this point made or finished, and in a Toronto film festival where it eventually landed, she'd asked us to make a 5-minute, she called it a trailer, but she said, don't cut it like a trailer. Like, I need to prove that the movie exists. Give me like 2 or 3 scenes and then like a montage of like wackiness. Because we actually, when we shot North Carolina the first time, we didn't have enough money to finish. So we had like 2 or 3 big gag scenes left to do. So we made this VHS tape back in the day, sent it out to some investors. We got another $600,000 of investment in to finish the movie, and then we reshot here in LA, like the harmonica gag scene, with the party, and at night, it was all at night. We all shot it up by in the Griffith Park, up by the Batcave, where the deer kind of comes through the windshield. The Ryder Strong's driving the truck. And it gets covered in the deer blood, and it's crazy. And I'm spacing on with the third. Like, there was like 3 big sequences that Eli was adamant we go back and get, no matter what. But and he was right, and we were happy to do it. And it just kind of, just took the film to that next level, like kind of what I was talking about earlier. Like when you read something and you're like, what the fuck? What is this? Who wrote why would you do this? And now I know why.